Okay. Do you see a red button?
I just said that it was okay to record.
Okay,
So.
perfect. Okay, I have a red button, so we're good. Okay, all right. My name is Jennifer Jowett from Lansing, Michigan. Today is October 15th, 2020. I am interviewing Kate Currie from Florence, South Carolina for the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance, which will be archived by Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. So welcome, Kate. We're glad to have you here. Will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became an educator and where and what you're doing right now?
Sure. So I'm Kate. I have been living in South Carolina for 5 years. I'm originally from Chicago, but before I was a teacher, I taught horseback riding lessons to a very competitive show team and managed a barn and really was the assistant trainer there, and that's where I learned that I loved teaching. And then I had a couple of injuries, as you do when you're riding horses, and I wasn't able to keep riding, but I still loved the teaching. So I decided to go to school and pursue a degree in education because it was clearly part of the passion, which translated into becoming an English teacher. So I got my master's in secondary education from DePaul. In my undergraduate in just English literature, and then moved to South Carolina in a pretty rural part of South Carolina, which was quite different than Chicago, to teach here.
Okay. And what events or experiences have you found that are similar to what you were doing when you were a horse riding instructor?
Really, kids are kids, right? So, anytime you're teaching kids, it's a blessing and it's really a privilege. So, yes, I'm teaching very different, content, but at the end of the day, I'm a teacher of children, of kids, not necessarily my content. So there's a ton of overlap as far as relationship building and, good practices and getting to know your student and unlocking the way each of your students learns. So it's very similar, horse or no horse, teaching is teaching.
What grade levels are you? Because you said you were secondary certified. So is that could be junior high or that could be high school, and tell us a little bit about that.
So currently I'm teaching juniors and seniors. I teach young adult literature, which is a dual credit course. I teach African American literature, AP language and composition, and AP literature and composition. But I'm also the head of our department, and our school goes 6 through 12. So I kind of have my hands a little bit in all of the different levels at our school.
Okay, those sound like really interesting classes to teach. Do you have a favorite?
It switches every year. I love African American literature. It's so discussion based. It's so interesting and so needed right now in our country, and it really gives the kids a chance to process some stuff that's going on. So I love that because it's such a safe space for kids to work through the world, and what they're experiencing. And I love AP literature too, for a lot of the same reasons, right? As we using literature as a mirror to the world and really kind of watching them make realizations that like, oh, wait, this old book is saying some stuff that's pretty relevant. So, I love really any literature class.
Okay. Let's go back to March of 2020 this year. How did you learn that teachers in your state would be quarantined?
Yeah, it was a wild ride. So our governor decided on Friday that our schools would close. And our administrative office knows someone in the governor's office. So we got an early heads up. So on Friday morning, we knew schools were going to close, and we knew the governor was going to announce it Friday at 4. Our school gets out at the time at 3:20. So I remember my assistant principal, I was walking up to do, my normal lunch duty, and she said, I need to talk to you. I was like, oh, great. So it was me and our head of school, our assistant principal, and then the teacher in charge of technology sitting in a room like, okay, what are the procedures? What policies are we going to do? How are we going to implement distance learning in a way that makes sense for our kids? And we have to do it right now. Now, granted, we have, we're already a Google school, so we use Google Classroom. All of our kids have devices. So, we were a little bit of ahead of the curve that way, but we had to come up with things like procedures for, attendance and, expectations of work. And were we expecting the kids to sign in live for all of their classes? Were we not expecting that? So we hashed out just kind of some general guidelines during our lunch period, and then started, the kids didn't have academic classes at the end of the day. We instead brought them into the gym, by grade level, and said, here are the expectations, get everything you need. Chances are we're not coming to school on Monday. Make sure you have what you need. So that's kind of how our quarantine process started.
That seems like a really fast turnaround. Were you up and running on Monday then?
Yes.
Or did you have, okay.
Yes. So Monday we had like a late start where the kids could come the first half of the day and get whatever they needed should they left it. But then afternoon, they were expected to be in class.
Okay. And what were the complications with that? What were the struggles?
We are rural, so some of the kids do have internet challenges. What we did was open up our parking lot more or less and said, hey, if you can get here, you can use our internet. If you can't get here, you have to let us know, and we're going to make an arrangement to get you here. We had a couple of kids that didn't have devices that were functioning, so we made arrangements to get those kids devices. So that was kind of trying to figure out who needed what. The issue really more than anything was the level of academic support our kids are accustomed to was very different. So part of my job is the academic center coordinator. And what that means is I work with our varsity athletes, which 90% of our school is our athletes. So I work with almost all of the upperclassmen in some capacity. And I see them every day after school. I actually just came from a basketball study hall. So they didn't, all of a sudden that support looked very different. It was, me calling them, hey, did you turn this in? How is it going? Kind of doing a one-on-one Google Meet situation, sometimes calling them on the phone, having their coaches have to call them because I can't possibly call all the kids. So we would kind of divide and conquer. And I was keeping a log on a notebook of like who I'd called when. So those were definitely like the shifting in support and not knowing how to best continue to support these kids who were used to a lot of support because we're very academically rigorous. And they just all of a sudden, didn't have that.
You mentioned that because of the rural area, the internet is difficult and that you opened the parking lot up so that people could take advantage of that. Did that happen with a substantial amount, and did that continue to happen throughout that time?
It actually not as much as you would think. So we had a handful of students and one of our faculty who, had an issue with internet, but not as much as kind of we anticipated, which is why we decided like, hey, this is how we're going to handle this. And we really didn't end up needing it a ton, which, we got lucky, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Did that problem get solved for going into this school year, or?
This school year, we are face-to-face.
Okay. So you're not encountering that. Okay.
Yeah. We have a distance learning option. So the kids can be on the live feed if they are at high risk or their family's at high risk, or, they feel they learn better that way. They can opt in or out of that distance learning at any time. So, but generally we don't have an issue. Fingers crossed that we won't have an issue.
Right. That's good. Okay. So the oral history project emerged from poetry that teachers were writing during the early days of all that social distancing that we had going on. Mm-hmm. How did poetry and the writing of that fit into your life while you were quarantined?
So I had a lot more downtime because I live alone. So I think I had more time. So I wrote more. And of course, I read a little bit of poetry, mainly on my phone, which feels very much like a kid thing to do. But I use it to process a lot. And at the time, my dog was going through chemo and I was kind of watching her decline. And I just had, so many emotions I was trying to process by myself. And then looking for ways to kind of work through those. And then also looking for things and remembering things that would bring me joy, and remembering kind of my connection to others, that had been changed so substantially and so abruptly. So I think poetry really helped me kind of unlock some of those feelings in a way.
I'm sorry to hear about your dog. Did the dog come through the chemo okay?
He did not, unfortunately.
Oh, so that was another loss during that time for you. Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. All right. Is there a poem that you might want to share from that time?
Sure. So this is a poem really, so I'm dyslexic and an English teacher. So it's a poem kind of about me as a kid and my relationship with my grandmother, who was also a teacher. The poem doesn't have a title because only about 5% of my poems do. It goes, Mom, I can't spell it, even when I try. Really, it's too long. Can you spell it again? Mercedes. Every day I practice. Dyslexia won't sever the link. Each time it gets easier. Slowly, I cement the link. A name that is the link between a grandmother and a granddaughter that share a passion for education, a love for music, and enthusiasm for hard work. One is here and one is past, but the name connects us beyond the divide.
There's a beautiful connection that you have in that link between the grandmother-granddaughter relationship. Can you expand on that, explain that at all?
Yeah, I am lucky in my life that I was surrounded by very strong women. And my grandmother was very much one of those women. She was a single mother. She was a teacher. She raised 2 children on a teacher's salary. When she eventually died of Alzheimer's, and as she was, really living with Alzheimer's, she was living with our family. She always would. She would read to us. She would tell us stories. She was always a teacher at heart, always. So it really was such a privilege. And, I hear some of her sayings in myself when I go to teach. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's my grandmother. Like, oh, work conscientiously. Like, she said that all the time. And I say that to my kids, like, you're in a hurry. Like, are you being conscientious? And so, that link was so important. And I always said, like, I'm never going to be a teacher, right? No way. I don't have the patience for it, or I don't have the demeanor for it, because she was so patient and so kind. I was like, I'm never going to be a teacher. And she knew. She was like, okay, yes, you are. That link with her is so important. And her, we share a middle name. Somebody knew what they were doing when that happened, but it's very important. And it's a link that I will always treasure.
That sounds like a strong relationship, a strong connection, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so COVID-19 impacted schools and states in different ways. How did your state respond, perhaps differently or the same as what was happening in other parts of the country, if you noticed that?
Yes. So my family still lives in Illinois. And I live in South Carolina, and the responses were vastly different. South Carolina was slow to act. We're still feeling that. We have our positivity rate right now is somewhere around 20%. At its peak, it was like 1 in 3 people. We shut down everything for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden it was like, yeah, you can go out to eat. So it was clear what was being valued, and it was economy, right? It was money. We weren't valuing humans, which was hard to watch. I'm sitting at home trying to teach my kids behind a computer screen and keep them safe when I can go to a restaurant. Like, it just didn't, the priorities were so, not aligned, that it was hard, as an adult for me to kind of cope with that cognitive dissonance, let alone the teenagers who just like had their track season was canceled and their soccer season was canceled, and they seniors don't get prom. But our state just whiffed. I mean, they really did. And I know that Illinois, especially Chicago, got some pushback because they cracked down very hard trying to avoid what happened in New York. And but right now their positivity rate's like 2%. So it was like my family and I were living in 2 different worlds. They were like, oh my gosh, like you have to wait in line to go in the grocery store. They're only allowing so many. And I was like, oh, well, it's a miracle if people are wearing masks in our grocery stores. So it was just 2 very different worlds.
Okay, you mentioned the losses that some of the students experienced, which as high school students, they're going to be extremely aware of what's going on, I'm assuming, because they usually are pretty cognizant of all that. Yeah. What did they express during that time?
It was tough. So the kids, some of them, handled it very well. But the seniors that graduated last year, I had since they were freshmen. So it was our last year together, and on the day that we got out, I walked into my room at the end of school, and I was like, you got to go. And it was this half the senior class. Our graduating class was like 56. I had literally probably over half of the senior class in my room, and they were just crying. And I was like, guys, like, it's okay. We don't know how long we're going to be gone. Like, it's okay. We knew. And they were just devastated. And I'm standing there like, I don't have any words to help them cope. Right. And in that moment, it was just so apparent that a school is not just a building, right? It is a community, and the kids, they love each other, and we have such a small school. And, our school does this like senior dinner where all the seniors and the families, we all eat dinner together before graduation, and we can't do that. And, just little things like that. And they were so sad. They were so sad. It was just hard to watch, because there's nothing I can do. I can't tell them it's going to be okay, or, it'll get back to normal, because there's no way to know.
Were you able to do anything to honor their graduation, or how did that unfold?
Yes. So we had, our school is on 100 acres. So we were able to use our own front lawn. So we had an outdoor graduation with our kids. We're 6 feet apart. And then we had like little clusters of family seating, and it was only immediate family. Each student was allowed, 4 tickets, and that's as many as you got. And they were kind of all the families were spread out. And we were able to have graduation that way. Which was, everyone masks were required, even on the graduates. The only time they got to take it off was when they walked across the stage for a picture. But they were great. They were great about it. They were happy to have it. We let them toss their caps from their seats, like just little things, to make it as normal for them as we could.
So they had some sense of closure then with the year, even if it didn't look the same?
Yes.
Okay, nice. Okay, so how did all of this impact your writing then, this situation with the seniors and feeling the loss of the highlights of senior year? And you mentioned that your school is small, so it feels very much like a community, a family. How did that change anything that you were writing about?
I think it really, I was very focused on the pressure and stress, and I was constantly asking myself, always interrogating, am I doing this right? Right? How am I doing this right? What is the best way to do this? Because I am obsessed with best practices, right? That drives everything I do. So I'm asking myself, what am I doing? Am I doing this right? And I just kind of kept going through this cycle of stress. And finally, one of the coaches who's a very good friend of mine was like, Kate, you are doing the best that you can. You've got to slow down. And you've got to remember that the kids are what's important. So enjoy, just talk to the kids today. You don't have to, not everything has to be perfect, but I just wanted it to be, because I wanted it to be normal, and I wanted them to, feel accomplished, that they could learn something and do something, and give them a reason, some of them, to get up and engage, right? Turn your camera on for this class, maybe, and they did. And, but that just kind of that stress became very apparent.
Did you find that your relationships with the students changed at all because of the virtual aspect of the teaching?
Yes. Luckily, I knew all of my students very well before, because I'd taught them before, and our school is small, and I'm so involved in athletics. So I luckily had a good foundation with the kids, which thank goodness, because I can't imagine trying to get to know a kid behind a computer screen. That's got to be so hard. And I had that to build from. But of course, you don't get to lay your eyes on a kid every day, right? You don't get to see them hey, how are you? Hey, you wore that hoodie, for 3 days this week. Are you okay? So those kind of questions became hard to ask. So I had to be, more direct about it, right? I couldn't kind of hint. I had to ask, how are you doing? and we had these weekly check-ins where they could send me messages, just kind of like, how are you? It's not related to academics. And I would respond, to them always. So some students, the relationship, we kind of leaned on each other more, right? They talked to me more. We engaged more. I'm calling them on the phone. I'm getting on a Google Meet with them and, in the background cooking dinner. I'm like, hey mom, how are you? What are we having for dinner? But some kids, I could feel them kind of pulling away and had to make a concerted effort. Like, no, like don't disappear. I see you. And had to be very cognizant of reminding every kid that they mattered and I saw them, which is harder when you're not seeing them face to face.
Yeah, it's harder to get that read. Did their writing change at all?
Some of them. So my AP students, not as much because they're laser focused. We had the change in the AP exam format. And when that happened, they were like, we got to nail it. So they were very focused. My elective classes, on the other hand, they definitely, yes. What they wanted to talk about was things like, we had to move away from dystopian fiction because it felt a little too real. So we read we read There Will Come Soft Rains, and they were like, yeah, I don't want to read any more like this. I was like, yeah, I don't blame you. So we shifted and we started looking for things that were empowering. And, because they didn't want to deal with anything that was like sad or isolating. So we definitely made a cognitive, a shift there, and they're writing in the same thing, right? So we do poetic responses sometimes where they can respond to the story in a poem. Those kind of became, you could feel them, right? They were sadder. And they were focused on different themes, right? So There Will Come Soft Rains, the story is about a house, but all of a sudden the story became about how the house was alone trying to fight this fire. And I was like, okay, like I see you, I understand. So yeah, the themes they were picking on definitely shifted.
Okay. Would you like to share another poem right now?
Sure. I can do the one that I was talking about that, really kind of dealing with the stress. And this was after my conversation with one of the coaches. So it says, now what? What's next? Always moving, obsessed with progress, agonizing over steps, never relaxing, fearing stagnation. Slowly stress snowballs. Stop. Breathe. Enjoy the moment. Enjoy the students. Enjoy the work.
Okay. Do you remember when you wrote that, where you were when you did that one?
I do. I do. I was sitting on my floor in front of my couch with my dog. And I literally had just gotten off the phone with the coach because I was so stressed out. And, when I'm stressed out, I always want to pet my dog. So I was sitting on the floor with her and, and he was so good about it. He talked to me for a while and I was like, yes, I hear you. I understand, I need to take a breath. I need to, take a moment for myself and realize that everyone is doing the best that we can. And remember why I like to teach. Right? What is it that brings me joy about this? Well, it's the kids, right? So take a minute and just kind of enjoy, interacting with them. And I remember that classes for their afternoon, I was like, hey guys, let's just check in. Like, hey, I read this cool poem. Let's talk about it. Like, what do you think? So it kind of shifted the tone even of my whole day.
How do you think this all would have transpired for you without the teaching? If you had gone into quarantine and you were maybe doing a different job or something?
Nope. It wouldn't have been good. Teaching is so important to me. And I truly, I didn't have any family in South Carolina. And so much of the teaching community is my family here, right? So, I talk about the coaches and they are my family. Our athletic director, our assistant athletic director, and the head of our basketball program, like those guys are my family and their families are my family. So kind of without that, that would have been terrible. That would have been absolutely isolating. Really my job brings me so much joy. And yes, there's a moment where it was so stressful, but just kind of, jumping on a Google Meet and just being like, hey guys, like, how are you? And, hearing about like, well, I went outside today and I was like, oh, good. I'm glad, just kids have a crazy way of just kind of like making you laugh and keeping you in the moment. So without that, that would have been so difficult.
Did you have students who were not leaving their house? I know you said South Carolina was fairly open about, going places and being unmasked, but within certain households, were there stricter rules?
Yeah. So the majority of our kids, so we explained it to our students like this. We're a very big football and basketball school. Like, where athletics is very important in our school. And we explained it like, okay, do you want a fall football season? Stay home. And they took that seriously. Like, you want summer workouts for football? Stay home. You want to work out for the summer and go play AAU basketball, get those college offers? Stay home. And they did. And they really did.
Nice. How did the writing get you through this?
I think, again, it was just kind of a way to process. And, I'm pretty picky about the writing that I share because it is so much like a piece of my soul, right? But, I think writing more kind of helps me feel a little bit less like, I can't share this, just because it became like normal, right? It became, it wasn't such a big deal because I was doing it so much more.
Did you have any aha moments about teaching or about how teaching should look after going through all of this?
Yeah. I think it just really reaffirmed things that I knew, but maybe had let kind of slide to the back of my mind. Like I said before, we are teachers of children. We're not teachers of content. And that was so clear that, you can't teach a student who is struggling emotionally, right? Or, has other issues going on. It was just such a glaring reminder because we're seeing the children in their home, right? A reminder that they do not exist in a vacuum, right? That they are full human beings with lives and challenges. And, I have a kid who's holding a baby brother, while he's in class, right? They're kids with challenges. And really honoring that becomes so much of our work, right? It's so important to make these kids feel seen, while still being able to, teach them at a very high level. Like, our school has very high academic expectations, and our kids, 30% of our kids are there on need-based financial aid. So, it is an independent school. And I think a lot of times we're like, oh, those are, rich kids. They're not. Our tuition is the lowest at private school in our area. We're in the poorest area of the state. So these are not very, of course we have some very wealthy children, but we have a lot of children who have, parents that are single parents who are working several jobs, and kind of understanding them as humans. Because we got to see it, right? We're staring at them. So it becomes very real.
So you mentioned that the students had some stresses in this situation. And I think that teachers get overlooked in this. We're, being called first line responders now, and expected to come in and do the job and manage all of the students and their emotional needs. And I'm not so sure that teachers' emotional needs are always being looked at. Did you find anything to be especially helpful during this time? Or is there anything that you would like to see changed as we're moving forward?
Yes and yes. So I'm going to start with the changes. Teachers are overworked and underpaid. I mean, that's just plain, right? I have 2 degrees and I make substantially more than my sister who has 1. I make substantially less, right? She makes substantially more than I do. We work in different fields, right? She works in tech. So that, but that's crazy, right? The issue with just teaching in general is, it's such a woman-dominated field, right? So often, women get overlooked. And that's just part of it. And I'm not saying that male teachers don't get overlooked, because you do. You're in the field. But truly, we're at a moment of reckoning in our country with so many things. And one of those things has got to be the infrastructure of our education system and how we are preparing and supporting our teachers. Because at the end of the day, there are no professions without teachers. Where does your doctor learn to read? In the classroom. So without supporting teachers, our entire infrastructure comes apart. And it was very apparent and clear that there was no central leadership as to what schools should have done or how to support these teachers or getting teachers the resources they needed. I have an incredibly supportive administration and a very supportive community. I have a kid who's not signing on. I can call their mom and they will be signed on in 5 minutes. So I had some of the best, right? The easiest, and I still struggled. I can't imagine, those teachers trying to work, in those high needs areas where they don't have administrative support. It's just unacceptable. Like we're continuing to fail our children by failing our teachers, and you can't do that. One of the things that was helpful for me, a couple things. One is having a community of teachers, right? So that we're all going through the same thing. And teachers so often are expected to do what you do, and you can't have a bad day because you're doing what you love. So every day has to be a good day, right? You get to do what you love. That's not true. That doesn't honor our humanity. Right? We get to have bad days too, and kind of understanding that there are other people that are struggling and kind of doing the same things that I am and feeling overwhelmed. And worrying about their students, right? Teachers worry more about other people's children than anyone. So that I wasn't alone in my struggles and worry. The other thing I think we need to normalize is mental health. Like, go to therapy if you need it. And I did. I reached out to a therapist and said, hey, I'm really struggling. Like, it's time to add some more sessions. So kind of normalizing that self-care aspect, because mental health should be same priority as physical health, right? If you're not healthy, you can't help. So both of those things were very helpful.
You said earlier on that you found that you had a little bit more time and you were able to do some more writing. Did you find the situation to be more stressful or less stressful, more work? What was your experience with it?
So I generally work every minute I'm awake. So for me, it was less physical work, but way more mental work. So when school let out, I was the academic center coordinator. I'm working with all of our varsity athletes. I've got kids that I'm trying to get into college, trying to get them to commit and sign. I also have at the time I was teaching 6 classes, and they were all different preps. I was also coaching track.
Oh, wow.
So I'm doing all of these things. So I was exhausted, right? I was physically exhausted, just like driving from place to place, right? So, okay, I've got a track meet. I've got to drive to a track meet. Okay, I've got to get the kids on the bus. Okay, we got to get this kid up to, his college so he can get a campus tour. So we got to work that out. So that physical moving changed. Obviously I wasn't driving anywhere. But mentally I was exhausted, which it took me a while to figure out. I was like, gosh, why am I so tired? I sat on the couch all day. Well, it's a different kind of tired. So mentally I was exhausted, right? So I needed kind of those releases, and something that wasn't work, to kind of occupy a little bit of my brain. I, started reading, books that I wasn't teaching again, which is something I generally do over the summer and certainly could not do with 6 preps. So I started trying to make an effort to do things like that again.
What is the school you're looking like for you now? You said that you guys are face-to-face. And is that statewide or is that a school decision?
It is a school decision. So like I said, we're a small independent school. We have just over 360 students. Our class sizes they were very small, but now they're even smaller. So like I have 4 sections of AP Lang. In a normal school year, I would maybe have 3. So they pulled out a whole nother section for me. Every kid wears a mask. All of our rooms are set up with the desks. Our desks are all at least 3 feet apart. They're all facing the same way. Teachers and students wear masks. There's hand sanitizer everywhere in our school. They get temperature checks. We all get temperature checks when we come in. They get, if you're traveling for athletics, which we are still doing, you get temperature checks before you get on the bus. So there's a lot more kind of like red tape. The kids have to take a Clorox wipe or a wipe and wipe down their desk every single time before they sit down, before, every class. And we kind of had to adjust our instructional time based on that. We ended up splitting our lunch periods. We only had 1 lunch period before because, the seniors go off campus and the juniors can eat here. And it was kind of like you can, eat wherever you want, with the exception of middle schoolers. Well, now our dining hall doesn't necessarily hold all of our middle schools while we're being compliant. So we ended up having to split, just having middle schoolers in there. The high schoolers couldn't come in. and take up 2 tables, right? And then having to squish the middle schoolers, which they will. So, those changes changed our bell schedule a little bit, changed the length of our school day is now 9 minutes longer to accommodate those 2 lunch periods. The kids now have a homeroom period, which we never had before, opposite lunch. But, a lot of our school is still normal. So we're still doing athletics. We still, very much have team sports and workouts and all of that stuff is going on. It's just with the extra precaution of, when we reintroduced athletics, like everyone has to get their temperature taken. They have to be in pods of 10 that are stable and can't rotate. So there were so many different phases. So now we're, again, we're playing other teams. We've got a football game tomorrow. We've got a JV football game tonight. Basketball played last night. So, some of it's business as normal, but it's just kind of this odd sense of normalcy now where you're sitting on the basketball bench and you have to have a mask on.
How are you feeling about this change, and how are the kids feeling about it? Is it more stressful for them now that you're back in school with the wiping of the desks and the temperature changes and the longer days and that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, the kids are resilient. I mean, they're handling it like pros. Like they're so good. They just do it, right? We've asked them to wipe the desks, so they wipe the desks, right? We've told them there are 2 lunch periods. They're like, okay, there are 2 lunch periods. Like they don't mind. They just do it because they want to be in school. We recently did like a distance learning, we called it like a dress rehearsal, where we took a school day and said, okay, we're going to, just do a dry run for whatever reason, right? Say, for whatever reason, we decided to do it. And the kids were like, we never want to do this again. We want to be in school. And we're like, okay, well, wear your mask and social distance and you get to be in school. So, the kids are handling it great. I think I say like, cover your face is generally my go-to line. I say that maybe, 10 times a day, which for teachers, 10 times a day is nothing. Mm-hmm. I ask them to be quiet more than I ask them to cover their faces. So, that's great. I think it's actually more stressful on some of the teachers, right? So the teachers who are elderly or who are immunocompromised, that's stressful. For me, it was stressful trying to figure out my family, right? I would like to see my family, but my parents are immunocompromised. So what do I do about that? How do I handle that? So those were kind of my stressors. It was less about me and more about like wanting to see my family.
Okay, it sounds like a lot, right? I'm sure it probably feels really good to be in an environment with people, right? Compared to what we had in the springtime. But it brings its own challenges for sure. Okay, so what benefits do you think we might have from this whole experience in understanding our students better and how education works?
I think, as educators, we learn some great skills, right? We are a resilient and flexible group of people. So we made it work, which is remarkable in and of itself. So I think kind of learning those skills is awesome. Hopefully we won't need them, but learning that's great. But as far as education, I think it was just so clear that, again, a school is not just a building, and teachers aren't just a math teacher or an English teacher or a science teacher, right? These are the lifelines for children. These are the people that children trust. These are sometimes, the stable adult in the child's life, right? That the teacher is the person that a lot of times helps build up that child's self-worth, right? Just by saying, good job, or yeah, that's right? We don't even think about it, right? We just kind of toss out yeah, good job, right? That's the right answer. But for the kid, that can be huge. So kind of understanding that, like, as educators, we have such a huge job. And understanding that job transcends the physical building, and it is not just a physical building. It's up to us to really help support these children in a way that they're not going to get anywhere else. Their parents love them, of course, and they support them and they help them grow in all of these wonderful things. But having an outside adult validate you is huge in a child's growth and development. So kind of understanding our role as teachers of human beings, and teaching the whole child, and not just, sometimes we get there like, I gotta get through chapter 10 this month. Do you? right? What's really important here is kind of the question that I'm continuing to ask myself, which I started asking myself in March when the school closed, right? What is the most important thing that I'm teaching today? Why am I teaching this? What is most important? So kind of those kind of interrogating my own teaching practice.
What would you like to see change about education as we move into the future? This has been really like a lot of turmoil in everyone's lives, parents and students and teachers and administrators, all over. What would you like to see changed?
Yeah. So I think truly, I believe a couple things. One, that parents, administrators, and teachers have got to be on the same team. And I think you see sometimes on social media, like the parents, are like, oh, I'm homeschooling my kid now. Like, no, we're all trying to educate the child, right? But that's how it should always be. So kind of remembering that we are all on the same team, and it is the same team that is supporting the child. So I think that's the most important takeaway from this, remembering that every person is doing the best they can. It could be that mom is an essential worker and cannot sit and monitor their kid on their Zoom classes. We can't judge that mom for that. Realize that we have to support that mom too, because the mom supports a child. But in the same breath, right, the parent needs to support the teacher. Right? If the teacher is saying, hey, your kid's not turning their work, they're turning in blank documents, the parent needs to go do their due diligence and say, yes, I support you. Let's, do our best for this child. So I think that's very important. I think, as far as changes, I would love to see some big structural changes. Our education system isn't working. We're since No Child Left Behind, we've been leaving a lot of kids behind. And of course, obviously that law is not enacted right now, but the framework is still there. Like, who are we kidding? So, I think taking a moment to really reevaluate what our education system is doing. What is the purpose? What are we trying to do? And then how are we doing it? And how are we going to do it best, right? We've got to be able to do it better. Why are so many days in May standardized test days? It's the same data. Why do we have to collect it 6 ways? So kind of examining, what is the purpose? And how can we best support all of our learners, right? Education is such a stepping stone for so many students that, really we do a disservice not really thinking about equity and access. And it's such a huge part of education, and it's not going to come naturally, right? If we look at the way that our schools are set up and funded, they're segregated, they're underfunded. So we have to put systems in place. We have to take the time to undo those systems that are, systemically unjust, right? A lot of times racist, even not in their intention sometimes, but sometimes in their intention, and take the time to dismantle them and then install systems that safeguard equity and justice for our learners.
Okay, we've been talking for almost an hour, believe it or not. Is there another poem that you would like to share with us?
I do. I have one more, kind of about how I feel about teaching. And this one has a title, so it's called The Most Good. It says, do the most good every day. Do the most good even if it is small. Do the most good even if you're alone. Do the most good when you feel strong. Do the most good when you feel lost. Do the most good despite the pressures. Do the most good despite the stares. Do the most good because you can. Do the most good because if not you, then who?
The repetition of that mantra grows stronger as it's repeated, and it feels almost like a meditation, right? Yes. Yeah, that's a very nice way for us to end. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
All right.